Welcome to Tame the Taboo. This podcast is brought to you by Discover Health. Discover Health specializes in healthcare, education, and resources for her most intimate concerns. I'm your host, Nurse Jenna. I'm a women's health and gender-related nurse practitioner, and I am making it my business to take you from sufferer to sensei. So if you are suffering from conditions that are not easily treated in an annual exam, or you want to join me on this journey to become my healthiest, wealthiest, best business owning self, sit back, relax, and enjoy these episodes. All right. Welcome back to another episode of the podcast, Tame the Taboo. Today, I am honored to have Jaely Turner. And Jaely describes herself, I really love this description, as a birth story listener. So she is a doula and a childbirth educator, but this idea of listening to people's birth stories and really giving women the space to process the crazy thing that has happened to them is really kind of Jaely's calling. So welcome to the podcast, Jaely. How are you doing today?
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
You are so welcome. So I gave you that warm introduction, but tell the people who you are. Like, what do you do?
Yeah, so you summed it up pretty well. I'm a doula, a childbirth educator, and a birth story listener. I came into this work during the pandemic, actually. Birth work was something that had been on my heart for a while, but I was really entrenched in another career. Like many people during COVID, I lost my job and I was collecting unemployment at the time, and I could not stop thinking about all of the people in their childbearing time. I had a 15-month-old at the time. I had just come out of some pretty severe postpartum mood stuff. And I had also been right in the middle of processing a traumatic birth experience of my own. And it was baffling to me that people couldn't have their support people in the hospital space at a certain point. And the people who had just had babies, they couldn't have their families over. They couldn't have people to support them. They couldn't even get out of the house to go to Target at one point in the pandemic. So that was really what occupied my mind. And so from there, I took my unemployment. I invested in a doula training. I started attending births, and the rest is history. I love working with this population. It's very fulfilling for me.
I love that. I also started my practice when I had a 6-month-old and also
Okay.
a 1-year-old or 2-year-old at home. So it really, for me, motherhood kind of like lit fire to all of these dreams that I had. And it was like
Hmm.
now or never. I don't know if you feel kind of the same way.
Yeah, it morphed because I was in the performing arts prior to being a birth worker. I was extremely busy. Like I had gigs booked 3 years out. And like I said, during the pandemic, it all disappeared within 48 hours. But even prior to that, um, I was a little bit burnt out, and I had already felt this calling to work with people in something that honored the mind and body connection. And I
Mm.
wasn't sure what that was yet. I had just completed a yoga teacher training. I really didn't know which direction I was going to go with it, but it really, really became clear to me when I saw where my mind was once everyone was forced at home. But yeah, isn't it funny that motherhood really brings you into who you truly are and brings you into your purpose?
Yeah, for me, it was like, okay, there's only a limited amount of time because I also had a traumatic birth with my first daughter. It was a
Mhm.
beautiful home birth, but after I ended up having a postpartum hemorrhage,
Oh,
um,
wow.
and had to be transferred to the hospital, almost died. It was really very scary. And for me, after having that birth and then doing it, you know, right again, having another home birth, this time, of course, it was beautiful, or thankfully, it was beautiful and no complications. But I really felt like, okay, like I've kissed death, right? So I have to start living life. It's time for
Yeah.
me to get on it.
Wow. That's really powerful.
Yeah. So tell me how you, as an artist, like, tell me more about the art you used to do and how that has translated into the work that you're doing now.
Oh my gosh, so much more than I would have ever imagined. So I was a classical singer. I still do work here and there, but I'm a lot more picky now about which gigs I do and don't take, since it's not my full-time gig. But yeah, I was a classical singer, primarily working in liturgical work and opera. So I was traveling a lot. I was doing a lot of like church services, weddings, funerals, masses, etc. And I would say I use that training every single day in birth work. So when I was a singer, I also trained in theater. I trained in Feldenkrais movement. I trained in dance. I trained in yoga, and all of these practices that were kind of adjacent and kind of enhanced the performance aspect of things. And when I became a birth worker, and you'll probably find this interesting because of what you do, one of the most interesting facts that I found when I was learning about birth, and again, I started learning about birth when I was pregnant with my first, like many people do. But if you look at the anatomy of the vocal structure of the larynx, if you look at it from the top, and then you put it side by side with a picture of the pelvic floor from the top, it's uncanny how identical they look in
Yeah, I
structure.
definitely know this. And one of the things that I do when I first start to teach women about like their pelvis and how to relax things and how to open up is I teach them how to breathe using techniques that I learned as a kid going through choir. So
Yeah.
diaphragmatic breath is really one of the first things that you have to do to get the transformation to go from hypertonic to tight, painful pelvic floor muscles to really opening up. So yeah, the breath work that you do in voice training and classical music is the same breath work that we do in pelvic floor. So it's a direct
Mhm.
connection. I love that.
Yeah, it's a direct connection. And one thing that's interesting about diaphragmatic breathing is it's actually impossible to breathe from your diaphragm. That's actually a very big misconception. And you hear that even with like singing teachers. They're like, breathe with your diaphragm, breathe. It's actually the diaphragm is an involuntary muscle.
Mhm.
So when you draw your breath, actually what allows the diaphragm to lower and flatten, much like the pelvic floor does when you take in a breath, right? You're relaxing the surrounding and supporting muscles to allow those lungs to expand, to allow the diaphragm to lower and flatten. And the same thing goes for the pelvic floor, right? A lot of it is just us relaxing everything else and getting out of the way.
Yep, getting out of the way, giving space. I love
Mhm.
that when I had my home births, both times I did what we call like breathe the baby out. So there
Yeah.
was no active pushing at all. Really, I was like, let me allow my body to fully be as flexible as needed to really give my
Mhm.
baby the space to make that voyage down into the pelvis. And that's what most women need to do. We don't need to actively push that baby out because then we're working against our body. Because when you push, you're actually creating more tension and less space. And really, what you want to do is just be as relaxed as possible and as open as possible and let that baby do its thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, so I mean, I see these parallels all the time between my old career and my new career. Like especially like the acting classes really taught me how to actively listen to people. Actually, that was the majority of what my acting classes taught me was really how to hold space for another person on the stage and to react to them and to listen to them and to be in the moment. My improv classes really taught me a lot about like going with the flow and being in the moment, which of course in birth is something that you really need to be able to do. And also with what I do with birth story medicine, there's a lot of just taking in the information and going right from there, not having any like pre-planned conceptions of how things are going to go.
Yes.
So
And
yeah,
you guys have this, what do you call it? The yes and.
yes. And
Yeah, so birth is also a lot of yes and.
oh yes,
Yes,
it is.
yes, I have planned this beautiful birth and it is not going according to plan. And also I can pivot and still make the both of this situation. It's definitely a lot of yes and.
And I've even, especially obviously like the breath, that's a huge part of of the birth process, right? I think a lot of people, when they come to these birth classes, they're one of the biggest things I hear. I ask everyone, what do you want to get out of this? And the biggest thing I hear from people is, I want to learn how to breathe.
Mm.
And the truth is, we've been breathing since the day we were born.
Mm-hmm.
We don't need anyone to teach us how to breathe. We need to get out of the way
Mm-hmm.
and allow that breath to happen. I've had situations before, actually, the most recent birth that I attended, where I've had to advise someone to take smaller breaths because they were just like taking up so much, and it was actually creating like tension in the pelvic floor, and they were almost like they were taking these big breaths for pushing, but then because they weren't able to let all that air out, they were taking in another breath on top of this stale air that was already in their lungs, and then trying to push again. And it actually turned out they were running out of air because they had too much in their lungs.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something that I only picked up on because I had a career in singing before, and we talk about that a lot, making sure that you get all the breath out before taking in the next breath, because otherwise you do start to feel like you're running out of breath, and you're just stacking tension on tension on tension.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is so interesting because a lot of what I kind of teach is take a inhale for 3, exhale for 5, right?
Yeah.
So that you are making sure that you clear the way and clear the breath. Okay, this is so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me what it looks like if I was to like come in and I'm like, Jaely, I have this traumatic birth and I have never been able to like get it off of my chest or get it all out of me. Like, what does it look like to have a session with you?
Ooh, good question. Well, it is different depending on the person. I always say I do read the room, but overall, we're going to be working with a moment in the story. And part of what I aim to do through the process is to help you find that moment for you. And that moment is going to be a pain point in the story, either something that surprised you, something that is still sitting and feeling a bit icky for you, something that you can't stop thinking about, maybe even something you avoid thinking about. And from there, we're going to take that moment and we're going to explore it in a few different ways. We're going to explore how that moment is showing up in your life today. Maybe any beliefs that you may be carrying about yourself as a mother, as a partner. If you're a doula, I work with doulas as well, as a doula, and kind of break it down and see if we can find something, maybe a new belief or new actions that ring more true to you.
I love that you include partners and also birth workers because when you have a traumatic birth, it's not just the birthing person that is going through that trauma, it's also the helplessness of the partner and the helplessness of the doula or the midwife. And that's so much trauma that just goes unexpressed because it's not their story. Oftentimes, people tell themselves as partners or as birth workers, this is not my story to feel harmed by, right? So then you just carry that weight with you. So I
It's
love
the
that you
story
do
of
that.
everyone who was in the room.
Mhm,
And everyone who was in the room probably has a different story.
mhm.
And
I
especially the caregivers, it's extremely important as caregivers that we are also processing those births as well.
mhm. And
Because
what
it's
happens if it goes unprocessed as a partner, as a caregiver, as a delivering person? Like, what are some of the ramifications of not telling these stories?
yeah, and that's super individual, but I'll start from the caregivers and kind of trickle down. So with the caregivers, and this is, we hear a lot about how, for lack of better wording, how messed up the birth world can be, especially in the more medicalized setting, right? And it's the truth that these care providers, they've seen so much and they've seen how things can go wrong. But sometimes that translates to carrying that trauma into a situation that is not related to that trauma whatsoever. So you see, and I see it in the faces of OBs, I see it in the faces of nurses and even doulas and other birth workers. There's this hypervigilance that starts to occur, and there's this inherently we begin to distrust the process of birth. And while there are variations and there are these situations that do warrant intervention and people can make the choices that they want during birth, at the end of the day, as caregivers, and again, it comes down to that improv, right? That yes and that staying in the moment and listening and seeing the person that's right in front of you rather than the people that you've supported in the past and the people that you've cared for in the past. We need to, it translates to us not seeing the person in front of us, but instead seeing these past situations as we navigate other births that are not that traumatic birth that you were a part of.
And that you probably take away from the birth that you are attending and the beauty of it and the variation because you're carrying the trauma of the past.
Yeah. So we need to find a way to take that knowledge now that we have of how things can occur and pocket that away for when we need it, but then also stay in the moment of the birth that's happening and make sure that you are seeing clearly what's happening in front of you. So, that's from the birth worker's perspective. From the partner's perspective, or just someone who's been a part of the birth, like a friend or a sister-in-law or a mother, etc. Sometimes that trauma left unaddressed can lead to fractures in the relationship later down the line. Sometimes if something scary happened with the birthing person, the partner may not feel that they have a right to their feelings about it, even if it was something that was really scary for them. If they thought they were going to lose the partner, they thought they were going to lose the baby, or maybe they just felt really helpless and didn't know how to support their partner when things got really hard. And that can lead to this internalized shame, this internalized like negative self-belief that they're a bad partner, that they didn't do everything they could. That can translate to a little bit of a wall being built up in the relationship, or trouble bonding with the child, or just like internalizing it, turning it in on themselves, and not allowing themselves time to just reflect and just be. They find that they sometimes, even when they have free time, they have trouble relaxing, or they don't feel like they have a right to do the things that bring them pleasure in life. And I see this as well with the birthing people. Same thing, that sometimes they internalize this belief. It means that their body failed them, or that they're a terrible mother. I hear that one a lot. Or that they're incompetent. And that can translate to issues with breastfeeding, issues with bonding with the baby, issues in the relationship, especially if they felt like the partner didn't support them in the way that they wanted or that they needed, or it can fracture the relationship between them and the caregiver. I've seen that a lot as well. Or, we all have this internal victim child and our internal self-judge. And that's usually where that conflict arises. Is there's the voice of the victim child that wants to find blame, wants to find where everyone else went wrong. And then there's the self-critic, which is trying to uphold some sort of like rule, arbitrary usually, that we've made about ourselves and how we're supposed to be and how we're supposed to act. And that kind of tries to shoot down that victim child and be like, you should have, or I should have. And because I didn't, this means this about me.
Again, the stories we tell ourselves.
Yeah. And it can like really lead to this like cycle of rumination, and it's like this revolving door. And that's usually where people are when they come to me. And so my aim is to kind of help people out of that revolving door of like, everyone else should have, oh no, I should have done this. This means I'm terrible. Oh, but the system is messed up and blah, 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 and all these stories that start to come from the original story.
Because
so we're just we're pulling out those threads and really taking a look at them.
So yes, these stories that you tell themselves might have some truth to them, and also they are not the entire truth. And
Correct.
also there are other aspects that we have to take into account in order to allow ourselves forgiveness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's why we work with one moment as well versus like going through the entire story, because it can be really easy to get overwhelmed and then just going like, going into all these different aspects of the story, and then we lose focus, we get overwhelmed, and it's kind of hard to make any steps forward. So I do find distilling the process to one moment, and again, I'm guiding you to help you find that moment in the story and then work with it. So I'm there to hold your hand through the journey, but working with one moment. I do find a lot of my clients, they then are, once they go through the process with one moment, they're able to look at other moments in their birth story and almost go through that process themselves and see things in a new way. It's very, very powerful.
You're equipping them with skills that they didn't have before.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. So is this typically one session, a few sessions? Like, what does it look like to work with you?
Yeah. So typically, most people find that one session is enough. Every now and then I do, like, if the story's really, really complicated, like I've done sessions with people who have had fertility struggles before, and that's a very complicated web sometimes, and that sometimes needs a little bit more time and to go through the process a little more slowly. Or if someone has never shared their birth story in its entirety and they want to just share the whole thing first, sometimes that will be more than one session, because we'll do a session where they just get the story out there, and then the next session will work with the moment. But typically, like in most situations, one session is enough. We do like, I'll hear essentially like the I want to say the quote unquote Cliff Notes version, but it's 3 to 5 minutes to let me know what they feel is most important for me to know about the birth story, so I get a sense of the essentially overview of the story, and then we're going down into the nitty gritty. But typically, I've never had someone need more than 3 sessions, but it's usually one. That was a very roundabout way of answering your question.
No, it's good. It's good. I'm excited for the work that you are doing, because there are so many birthing people that need your services and don't even know that you exist, because you are a unicorn with unicorn skills. So I think it's important for us to really kind of have an understanding of like what the journey looks like, and when we come to work with you, what is there to expect. So that is great.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
on that note, tell us a little bit more about like your practice, where we can find you, how we can book you.
Oh, yeah. So I am on Instagram at Our Village Circle. I'm pretty active on there. And I also have a website, www.ourvillagecircle.com. I offer in-person childbirth classes. I also offer a online webinar called Preparing for a Smooth Postpartum. And I offer childbirth doula services and postpartum doula services. And for folks who are maybe not in the DC area or are on the fence about hiring a doula, I'm not sure they can make the full investment in that, I also offer like one-on-one Zoom consultations to essentially do the part of the doula work that's not the actual attending the birth. So helping answer questions, helping figure out how you can advocate for yourself, helping you make your birth plan, all of that sort of stuff.
Great. Okay. So we will find you on Instagram. We'll go to your website. We'll book you there, talk about our birth stories so that we can move forward with our healing process.
Yeah. Yeah. The more people healing, the better, I think. I think that's the path forward to really changing motherhood and the birth world.
I really like to think that when I am helping someone to heal and get over like physical pain, that I'm helping them to show up in the world as their best selves. so that we can really create a transformation in society, because we have these people operating at their highest capacity. So what
Yeah.
you're doing is so important. It's more than just let me get my birth trauma off my chest. It's let me show up in the world as a mother, as a partner, as a friend, as a person, the way that I was designed to. So that's awesome.
Yeah. And that's the most fulfilling part. And, the mind and the body are so intricately connected. I'm sure you have stories as well where someone may be holding on to physical trauma in their pelvic floor muscles.
Everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody, 100%.
Yeah.
And you can see it even if I'm seeing somebody who has overactive bladder, so urinary frequency urgency. When we, pull those threads apart, as you say, to figure out when their symptoms are worse, it's when they are experiencing more stress, when they are unable to process the trauma that's happening to them. Their body is reminding them, hey, something is going on. I'm not comfortable in this situation. So we are total beings and we have different aspects to our lives, but they're all interconnected. So
Yeah.
yeah,
The
it's
body
really
is so smart.
so smart, so smart, smarter than our brains for sure.
Yeah.
So well, this has been such an interesting conversation. I can't wait to get it out into the world. And I really do just want to thank you for sharing this time in this space with me. And I look forward to us continuing our relationship and figuring out how we can work together.
Yeah. Likewise. This is super fun.
Yay. Okay, so we know where to find you. Thank you so much for joining the podcast. And we will see you on the next episode of Tame the. That was great.
Yeah, that was fun.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Tame the Taboo. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit like, share, and subscribe. Send this to your girlfriend so they can join you on your journey as we transition to our healthiest, wealthiest, best selves. See you on the next episode.